Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 239, Shaping the Future Through Leadership with Jessica Nápoles. Recently selected by the membership, President-elect of the American Choral Directors Association, Dr. Jessica Nápoles joins me to talk imposter syndrome, leadership, and her ACDA passion. Balancing a passion for music with the demands of higher ed isn't easy, but Jessica, who is a professor at the University of North Texas, has found a way to do just that. In this episode, we explore her unique career path that defies the notion of having to choose between being a conductor and being a music educator. Jessica shares how her journey has been a hybrid of both passions, challenging the traditional idea of what it means to be a college professor in choral music. We discuss her innovative approach to field experience and peer lab choirs at UNT. She also shares her leadership journey within ACDA and her commitment to fostering a culture of celebration and growth. We also tackle the perfectionism trap, imposter syndrome, and how social media influences our perception of success. So tune in and listen all the way to the end. And then when you're done, leave your thoughts over on the Choralosopher's Facebook page and or sign up for the free newsletter on Substack at choralosophy.substack.com, and you can leave comments there as well. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registrations simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never-ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations. I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber to this show. That's not required, but if you want me to keep doing it forever, I'm going to have those people subscribed. You can start at $3 a month, all the way up to $20 a month. And on Patreon, there's a list of different levels with different perks, so to speak, or on Substack, you can simply upgrade your free subscription there to a paid subscription. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. All right, everybody. I am here with Jessica Nápoles, and I'm really excited to talk to Jessica. Jessica's been somebody I've been admiring from afar for quite a while, and I'm excited to finally have Jessica on the show, so welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
This is going to be a blast, and we're going to talk about one of the first things I want to talk to you about is congratulations on ACDA president. I need to do some like Hail to the Chief playing in the background or something. Maybe we should do that.
A little bit congratulations, a lot of condolences, somewhere in the middle. Yes.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but why don't we first have you just share a little bit about who you are, kind of what got you to be doing what you're doing right now at the University of North Texas, which we can see in the banner behind you.
Yeah, so I guess the first part of the journey really starts in 8th grade, and a really fantastic middle school teacher, like so many of us that have that journey where somebody really just invested in us and got us excited about the craft and making choral music. And when I think about Sybil Adcock, that was the name of my middle school teacher, she was just so great with people. Like I still aspire to be the way that she was in terms of just that uncanny ability to connect with people in that way that just made everybody feel valued, important, respected, and even little 12, 13-year-olds. And so that's where it started for me. I was born and raised in Miami. My parents are Cuban, so that was my background. And I was my first language was Spanish. I learned English second. And that was my journey all the way through in high school. And then I went to school in Tallahassee, about 500 miles away from Miami, but still in the state. And then went to Florida State for all three of my degrees in music education. After that, I was teaching at the University of Utah in a very similar position to the one I have now. I was there for 11 years. And now I'm at the University of North Texas, and this is year 8. So it's a really cool thing that I get to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about my positions, what makes it maybe a little bit unique, and the reason why I love it, is that I get to do the things that I enjoy doing without having to sacrifice one or the other. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people that go down the path of DCA, right? A director of choral activities, and their
Mm-hmm.
goal is really central to making music, being a choral conductor. Maybe part of their evaluation is going out and becoming famous based on all of the competitions that they win and all of that kind of life of touring, etc. And that's that
Mm-hmm.
sort of stream. And then on the other side of that, a lot of times when you think about people who pursue a PhD in music education and you see that stream, it generally is under the academic, scholarly, and sometimes, unfortunately, and I think to the detriment of our profession, never the two shall meet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, therefore, you're either a musician slash artist and performer, or you're an academic, or you're a scholar, and therefore you pick a lane.
Mm-hmm.
I think my entire career in higher education has been the marriage of those things and kind of showing that we can do more than just live in one box or
Mm-hmm.
the other. And it is really important to me that I am making music. I don't want to give that part up. And I'm also really not comfortable with the music education only sort of life, which also brings with it the layers that are most related to only being in my head, only being in a place where I am publishing and that's all that I do. So I would say that a lot of that is really formative to my identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I've landed in that hybrid space. I've published an article about this to just kind of bring awareness to the fact that that can happen and that can be a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
that's
really
where I am.
interesting. That's really interesting, and I love that, and I want to reflect on it for a second before we move on because in a couple things that you said. One, I've noticed that trajectory in my own life. I decided about 15 years ago, so 7 or 8 years into public school teaching, that I was never going to go through higher ed. I was never going. I had my master's degree. I did not want to. But as a younger person, I had a lot of the same dreams and aspirations a lot of us do, which is I'm going to get the DMA. I'm going to be a DCA. I'm going to do all the performance things, and I'm going to be, a conductor or whatever. And I decided I didn't want to, and I've just gone full heartedly into teaching. And
Mhm.
now I think if I were to ever, teach at a higher ed type of an institution, I would want to go music education. I want to teach people how to teach
Mhm.
because it's become such a passion. I still love to perform. I still love to conduct a great choir, all those things. But you said identity. And I think
Mhm.
that's resonated with me. Like it's no longer part of my identity in the same way. And so they shift over our lives and careers. Is that true?
I think it shifts, and it's also not always the case that people even feel like they have choices. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm encouraged to hear what you have to say from the standpoint of it was something that I thought about. A lot of times people only have one very narrow view of what it looks like to be a college professor in choral music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of narrative that I'm trying to shift, that it only looks one way. And sometimes my students might even sort of question, is this something you settled for as opposed to actively selected? And there are sometimes a little surprised when I say this was actually something that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And at each job interview that I've had in higher ed, the question has been posed to me, well, if you were here, which choir would you like to conduct? And of course, there's a right answer and a wrong answer depending on who's on the committee. But I think what's been really revelatory is that most people would assume that your answer is, well, of course, I would want to conduct the top group. And in both of my interviews, I have said, do you have a y'all come group? Do you have a non-audition group? That's the one that I'm really passionate about conducting. And it's a funny thing because that's looked upon as though somehow I'm either less ambitious or you don't really have the level of musicianship in order to do that kind of work at that level.
Hmm.
And mostly the thought in my mind is just that's my preference because it's so tied to my identity to just be a music educator and teach people how to teach,
Right.
as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, during my and that could be maybe some people struggle to see that because of how they grew up and where they went to school. That could be possible. I know I went to UMKC during the Eve Ely days, and so I had the positive example of Charles Robinson doing music ed stuff, but still conducting ensembles, and Eve doing the DCA stuff and having all of those, the fancy choir or whatever. But we never saw Charles Robinson at the music ed guy. We never saw him as like not a choir director.
Yeah.
Like he was a choir director the whole time.
Yeah, and that I think is the key. The fact that you saw that as a model,
Right.
right? I was
Mhm.
so lucky to see that in Judy Bowers and all of my time in Florida State. And one of the reasons why I kept coming back, there's always just so much to learn. And she's just such a master teacher. But there was, for some people, that model that you just described doesn't exist. That model is, you're either, you're or, but
Mhm.
it's never the two in the same person. And Chuck's such a great guy because he really understands that teacher preparation piece, and he understands that that's important, and that's also tied to his identity.
Mhm.
So good for him that he gets to do that, but also good for his students to be able to see that's option also,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one other part of your story I want to reflect on before we move on is you back at the very beginning. You said it started in middle school with a fantastic teacher, and one of the things that you said I found interesting was that she even made us feel important as 12, 13-year-olds. And I'm sure as a music ed professor you've thought back to that. So hopefully this is not too much on the spot. Do you remember what it was that happened in that classroom that made you feel that way?
I can remember several things. Number one, she would take the time to talk to us as people who were curious beings, and we were really curious about a lot of things. And I remember even just times when we were talking about the meaning of life. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And when you think about the ways in which people interact with middle school students, sometimes, or just adolescents in general, sometimes there's this sense that they are really being condescended to, or they are being treated as the, well, you don't know anything, so let me just share with you all the things that I know. And lots of people take that approach of waxing philosophically. And she was just really curious and asking us questions. Well, what do you think? What do you think we're here to do? And sometimes that would lead into another conversation about something. And we would just hang out after school and just talk and talk and talk. And she was genuinely interested. She also used humor in a way that was really effective. And I think all of it was still under the umbrella of treating students as humans as opposed to being instruments in the ensemble, which we
Hmm.
see a lot. And she was treating us as people that she was curious about understanding as people, as opposed to just, you're my students. And while some people might say, well, you got to keep that professional boundary, and it's important that you are the student and I'm the teacher, she still was able to be effective in sending that message of, I'm the professional, I'm a teacher. But still, we all came away feeling like she was interested in our development and growth as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. One of my favorite compliments I think I've ever received from a former student. This is person was a soprano in my choir 10 years ago. She's like 28 now. And she said, one of the things I loved about your class, Mr. Muntz, was that you treated us like adults, like adult musicians. Like you gave us tools, and sometimes it was super annoying to me, she said, because she was like, you were super annoying because you just like wouldn't solve my problem for me. But now looking back on it, Like, I'm so glad that you, right. And so I think they're a kind of a high school version of what you just said, which is as we grow up, we're trying, I think one of the things we try to do as music educators is teach the kids in our class, even the young ones, that it's not that we are collaborators here. Like I have a job, you have a job too, though, and I'm not going to do your job. So, that even though that can be annoying in the moment, like kids appreciate that because then they feel like, hey, I have a contribution to make here too that matters.
And I think, Chris, you have always been such a champion for student independence and
Hmm.
empowering students as a result of their feeling that they are independent. And I think really excellent teachers understand that to be a goal, that eventually you have your own thoughts. And even
Yeah.
when they don't coincide with mine, and even when you go off and have other directions that you might take, what an empowering thing to do for an individual to say, I, as a teacher, see you not only as a student in my classroom that I'm investing in, but also somebody that I want as you leave and you carry with you. There are some tools that you learned here in building your own critical thinking skills, but also your independence, whether that's in terms of musicianship or the fact that how you think and process things is that's a really important part of what you're getting in education writ large,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
that's important.
Yeah. Now, do you teach methods classes as part of your course load?
I do. So
Which ones?
I have choral methods, which is my senior capstone, if you will, right before the student teach. And then I conduct a choir. So at UNT, our loads are 2-2, which just means 2 classes in the fall, 2 classes in the spring. So it's choral methods and choir, or choral methods and choir. With every other year, I introduce a graduate class, which is college music teaching, which is just preparing people, not just music ed, but all of the folks that are maybe even performers, bassoon, trumpet, anybody who is wanting to have a college job and doesn't quite know how to navigate the academy and what the structures are and how all of that works. So that's been a fun thing for me too. But generally, choral methods as the undergrad class is what I teach.
And then do you like advise or supervise student teachers? Like how far down the road do you take kids or young adults?
I am not the official student teacher supervisor. That is my colleague, Jamie Kelly. He's another choral music ed faculty member at UNT. And so that falls under his umbrella.
Hmm.
But my class is a 4,000 level class, which is mostly seniors. And they go from my class to student teaching.
Hmm. Now, what could, because it's been, I'm old and it's been so long since I took a methods class. What do students in a methods class at UNT, based on, you kind of your philosophy for, you've got them for X amount of time. What are you trying to impart on them during that time to go out and be able to be a music teacher in a choir classroom someday?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really believe very strongly in the importance of field experience.
Hmm.
And I think we can do peer teaching all day long, but there are some problems that they're not going to encounter until they stand up in front of real kids
Yep.
and they see that that student can find dough when you just gave them a pitch and they need another tool, or
Yeah.
they have to strategize in different ways, or they have classroom management challenges, etc. So I trade off a lot of curriculum. If you think about a typical college course is 15 weeks, our students are out in the schools 7 of those 15 weeks. And I'm lucky, very lucky to have wonderful partners in the area. And because the North Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth Metroplex is large and there are lots of places within driving distance to UNT, our students go to nearby middle schools, nearby high schools, and they practice teaching. And so we are able to go from, let's say, 7 in the morning until 11 in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we'll go to one school twice, Tuesday and Thursday. Then the next week, we'll go to a different school twice, Tuesday and Thursday. So they get a lot of opportunities not only to work with varied levels, the high school and the middle school, but they also get a bunch of different models for what the teachers are doing in their own classrooms.
Yeah.
I also have a few that they just get to observe and they get to see a master teacher at work. And then the next time we go, we'll teach those students. So they get a chance to also see, oh, okay, here is what this person does with changing voice issues, or here's how it goes. So the first part of your question is really the philosophical thrust there, which is field experience matters a lot to me.
Yeah.
The second part of it is we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the semester getting them prepared for how those elements look. For instance, what are some sample vocal technique things you can do once you've identified student objectives for what you want to do, so that we're looping all of these things around rather than just here's a vocal technique exercise that's totally divorced from our goals with the repertoire. Let's find ways to link all of those things. And then now, how could you design a sight singing exercise to help them in the challenges that they're experiencing with the repertoire? So if the students are going to a school, one of them is doing the vocal warm up, one of them is doing the sight reading, one of them is doing an oral skills, and then we have a couple of repertoire things and maybe a focus activity thrown in. But the idea is that they're getting prepared to do those things
Hmm.
along the way. And also remember, they've taken multiple music ed classes before they get to my class. So they've done a little bit of the thinking through your philosophy of teaching. Let's think through some ways in which you might understand drafting lesson plans, and all of that kind of stuff has happened,
Yeah.
even though we reinforce some of it. We also talk about assessment and how to make that in a meaningful way, how to address special learners and what kinds of things happen in the classroom that could be adapted as a result. And then we talk about rehearsal technique. I'm also fortunate at UNT, we have peer laboratory chorus up front, which is a really cool thing for them because they get to conduct their own peers, and we bring all the choral music ed people into one room. They're all a choir, and they not only get a chance to learn a lot about repertoire, but they get a lot of rehearsal practice and really quickly learning how to put something together, take them to a point where they can perform, even though they only have 3.5 rehearsals with the group.
Yeah.
And then that serves as building some rehearsal technique, even though that's separate from the class that I teach. So it works alongside, in tandem, giving them some strategies for teaching. Although, like I said, peer teaching is different from
Oh my goodness,
field
yes.
teaching,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So they need both of that.
Yeah, that's really good, and that's a really good summary too, because I think you're exactly right. Probably one of my biggest pet peeves is the lack of distinction oftentimes between what works in theory and what works with, like, my favorite phrase is real life actual human children. Okay, music educators of any age group, any level, any instrument, it's time to ditch the old fashioned paper music literacy tools and sign up for Sight Reading Factory. It's just going to change everything about how you do what you do and the efficiency with which you do it. So go to Sight Reading Factory, sign up for $35 a year, and then knock 10% of that off when you enter Choralosophy at checkout. First time you sign up, every time you renew, and if you add accounts for a couple bucks per kid per student, you can knock 10% off of that as well. It's just a no-brainer. So head over to Sight Reading Factory and get signed up today. Because
Yes.
they're, like, for example, just the silliest things like, um, what happens when you get a kid who not only is struggling to match pitch, but they don't even know how to get their vocal folds to touch at the same time,
Mhm.
because they don't naturally phonate. And if you've been only in a college voice studio so far, and you've seen what other people like you who are good enough to get into UNT or whatever, what they sound like and how they adjust certain things, that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah, and
Those types of things.
how could you
Hmm.
not be exposed to a when I give a downbeat, nobody's singing,
Yeah.
that's a different task
Yes.
than, oh, I've got to think through some different
Uh-huh.
strategies than just here's your pitch and go. Not to mention, I have a full-time accompanist who's just sitting there waiting for me to give them instructions. So all of those things are so unrealistic to what
Yeah.
their actual teaching
Yeah.
setting is,
Yeah,
for
one of
sure.
my favorite memories, I don't know if it's a good memory, it just makes a good story, is that when at my master's conducting recital, I did half of the recital. It was kind of a performance focused conducting degree that I did. And my final project was essentially to put on my own concert, and I had to do, or I chose to do half kind of adult peer professional level musicians, and then half undergrad singers. And that I put that together, and I made my recital. And my family came, and my family, my mom was a music teacher too, and my siblings all understand music. They're not professional musicians, but they grew up singing in choir and watching my mom and watching me and all that kind of stuff. And so my brother knows what he's looking at. And he came up after the concert, and of course, I'm expecting just compliments from my family. And my brother goes, "Wow, sure looked like you were working a lot harder than the singers."
That's an insightful brother.
Uh-huh. Yep. But of course, then as my music education brain turns on, and I said, okay, so that's actually a problem not in the concert. That's a problem in the rehearsals. Like I wasn't getting that out of them in rehearsals. And so of course it was annoying to hear that, but that was what I needed to hear in that moment. Just those types of real life feedbacks that you can't give kids in a methods class. They have to get out there
Mhm.
and just do
Yeah.
it. Yeah, that's really good.
Wow.
Okay, let's switch to ACDA because
Mhm.
this is a fascinating thing for me. Because why on earth would you subject yourself to being like publicly visible in ACDA leadership? I'm being funny, of course, but why go for this position? And congratulations again for getting it. I voted for you, so yay. But what are you? What's the story there?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, ACDA has always just been so meaningful to me. I remember the very first, state conference in Florida as an undergraduate. I remember the clinician. I remember Henry Leck. I remember the feeling in the room, the energy, the vibe of people who were just so committed to learning. And I remember just feeling like I was part of something that was larger, and there was something that was just so exciting about people who were committed to this craft in that way. And that was in Florida, so the state conference. And then I started attending national conferences, and I just never stopped. This was, back in the 90s. And so the commitment to the organization and just seeing something that was just so cool that was larger than any one of us, that was the first thing. The second thing was the inspiration that came. I've always been really excited about leadership, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I feel excited about and really passionate about. I read a lot of leadership books. I read a lot to just kind of hone the craft of being a leader, because all of us as teachers are leaders. All of us as choir directors are leaders. And I remember in anticipation of the 2015 conference, Mary Hopper, who was planning that conference, reached out to me and she said, "Are you interested in doing honor choir chair?" And I was like, that sounds really cool. I didn't know very much about, what that kind of a commitment was going to come to. I learned really quickly, and probably in the course of that 2-year period, I probably devoted like 500 hours to the task. I mean, it was an intense job. And then the thing that struck me about that is at the end of it, the next person came on, and this was now Tom Shelton, and he asked me if I would do it again. I was like, yes. Like, who does that? First of all, like, that's a little bit insane, right? But I also remember I didn't know who Mary Hopper was. I just remember feeling like, what a cool thing for somebody to reach out to somebody who was relatively new in the profession and say, "Hey, I think that you could serve in this capacity and this would be fulfilling for you." And then, yeah, she was right. I also see that as something that is indicative of the larger ways in which we need to reach out to people who are maybe not always in the front and center limelight, or people who have been doing service for a long time. What would it look like if we just said, "Hey, even though you haven't done a whole lot at the national level or any other level, I see something in you. Like, what if we all did that? Wouldn't that just
Mhm.
be such a great way for people to feel that they were contributing in a meaningful way and that somebody believed in them?" And so I think about that in the ways in which Mary brought me on board. And then I just never stopped. Then I shifted to other positions. When Andre was now planning his conference, this was when we still thought it was going to be in person, and then it shifted to virtual. And that was a whole nother challenge. I won't say that that was fun challenge, but it was a challenge all the same. And Lynn and Edie had asked me to be kind of like a co-conference chair, and that was just so exhilarating. So I think when I got the phone call, it was Andre because it comes from the past president's council to nominate potential folks for president. And he called me. And so, number one, that was really special, just having it come from my teacher and having that invitation of, on some level, a stamp of approval and feeling that was something that I could do. And initially, I just thought, I can't do this. Like, I don't have enough experience or I don't know what I'm doing. And all the usual things that happen when somebody engages in impostery feelings and
Right.
self-doubt and all that. And then I said, well, how much time do I have to give you an answer? And he was like, well, 24 hours. I was like,
Oh,
ah.
wow.
And that, kind of brings with it its own, like, what are the priorities for me? What are the things that I need to think about quickly? And what is it that's a variable here? And I think the more that I thought about it, the more that I thought there's a potential here for impact. And a, there's a drive for me, going back to what I just mentioned about leadership and how excited I am about leadership and building that skill. But then also, what an exciting thing to be able to now give that to somebody else. The same thing that Mary had done for me to say, hey, I want to bring you on board. I want to bring you into a place where you're serving. How cool that I get to empower other people. How cool that I will get to be in a position where I will say, let's have you step into your role as a leader that maybe you don't even know you have just yet.
Mhm.
And so as I think about all of those things, the things that matter so much to me, and these will probably make their way into a conference theme in some way, but the two things that matter the most to me are building leadership, cultivating that leadership in people, because I think that's so important in our profession. And number two is the pedagogy piece. And that's so central to my identity, but also pedagogy is where it's at. That's what makes choirs happen and continue to develop and to continue to succeed. So where I see the potential to have an impact there is just in that building of leadership and in prioritizing pedagogy in a way that matters to all of us, but is more intentional
Okay.
than, maybe what some people might assume with ACDA. People are looking for, let me build my own career. Let me build my own fame. Let me build my own. I think some of that can be um, shifted to a narrative that is engaged in, are we working on developmental choirs? Are we focusing on the building of a choral program as opposed to the people that are seeing ACDA for purposes of self-aggrandizement or self-promotion? And there are some that are in that
Yep.
space. So how can we shift some of that narrative to, the service mind, but then also building leaders, cultivating that leadership experience, and prioritizing the pedagogy piece because that's what we do.
Yeah. Okay, so I definitely perked up at the pedagogy part, although I'm all for leadership as well. But I'm going to zero in on that. In fact, because just today on Facebook, I saw yet another thread of teachers complaining about ACDA not doing enough
Mhm.
at conferences for how do I teach people how to do this.
Yes.
Um, and of course, the steel man, so to speak, for why ACDA would not do that as much as maybe you would say that they should, or whatever, is because well, we have NAFME, and
Mm.
NAFME does that.
Mm.
That's what they're in charge of the pedagogy, etc. But of course, if you go to a NAFME convention in most states, at least this has been my experience, the band teachers run that. and and it feels like a very band oriented event, and that's not, I mean, I understand that there are oftentimes in a lot of places the band programs are kind of run the show in a lot of ways, and that's not a dig against our band colleagues. But if there's going to be specific vocal pedagogy, how to teach someone to read music, which is different than a piano player, but for a singer, it's a completely different thing. You know, the way I see it, ACDA it drops the ball every time they don't feed us with that type of pedagogical support and professional development. Is that what you mean when you say pedagogy? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think the first point that you made is exactly right. Sometimes, and this goes back all the way to the beginning of our interview here, where we bifurcate this. This is what NAFME does. This is what ACDA does.
Uh-huh.
And NAFME does the teaching. And let's be honest, sometimes if you go to NAFME at the national level, what you'll get is not as much on the pedagogy anymore, but also just entirely a research thrust. And then you go
Mm-hmm.
to ACDA and you get the musician thrust of here are these wonderful performances. So once again, we're left with that bifurcation of you're an artist or a pedagogue. And
Mm-hmm.
I think because I am so committed to living in this space where the two are wedded and where we're not simply saying, well, if you are a great performer, then the pedagogy is separate. No, it's integrated and it's in everything that we do. Pedagogy is essential to choirs being great. So
Mm-hmm.
when I think about the element that you just mentioned, where we think about ACDA as just here are the wonderful choirs, and NAFME is the thing where you're maybe trying to teach people how to teach, you're missing an opportunity to say from where to where and how did you get there and what was that process? Because if we're singularly product oriented, we're missing a lot that goes into that really important development of the singer, development of the choir, development of the teacher.
Yeah.
So I'm envisioning, something very much along the lines of what you mentioned, where there's a place where you can watch as people are providing tools for not the choirs that are performance choirs on the stage, but performance choirs that are specifically maybe in the area. I don't know because we don't know where the conference is going to be, but wouldn't it be cool if you just got to see a developmental group and then somebody was providing the rest of the audience with some tools for how those things are. Help me find some strategies to help them when they struggle with breath management. Help me find some strategies to help them when they struggle with how to raise a soft palate. All of the things that we think everybody's just supposed to know those things, but we're going to keep all of that hidden. And all of those tools are just going to be something out here that you were supposed to have gotten somewhere along the line, but we don't talk about those things. What a missed opportunity. And if you do go to a conference and you can come away with saying, I got some things that I can take with me to my next rehearsal because now I have 5 more ways to address intonation issues than I did before, then what a cool thing to have gotten at a national conference.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right, and there's that kind of in between space too that a lot of teachers, of course, I'm uniquely positioned in our profession in a lot of ways to hear from a lot of people, and especially the complaints. Um, um, but one of those complaints is that a lot of people fall in this middle ground that the ACDA convention almost never speaks to, and that middle ground is I've got a choir at my school. It's like it's not terrible, but we are just for the first time for a lot of these kids trying to figure out what a choir program at a school should be. So I mean, yes, I want my ways to address intonation issues, but I also, but I can't talk about vowel formants, for example, because we we're not there yet. Like we're not to
Yeah, it's
that
not
point where
relevant.
it's not relevant to them yet because we're just figuring out where to stand
Mhm.
and where to look on the page. And I
Yeah.
need repertoire. I need reading sessions that are geared towards the developing choir. And it sounds like just from our conversation so far that that's kind of the one of the passion points you're talking about,
Mhm.
right? And what is the ACDA president in your view? In what way do you have a capacity in that position to make changes in that direction? I guess what are your bully pulpits? What executive orders can you sign on things? On
It's a
pages?
good question. And
Yeah.
the honest truth is I don't know because I don't know yet in terms of the structures within the organization, what is possible, what is under which purview. But I can say that I would have a lot to do in the putting together of a national conference in terms of the content and ideas and philosophical approach. And some of that starts, yes, with reading sessions, etc. Some of that starts with how are we going to incorporate some new types of sessions, or do we stay within the things that we've done all the time just because we've done them all the time and therefore we're expected to do those all the time.
Hmm.
And I think that's where we have a real opportunity for growth is in listening to the teachers, as you said, that are complaining and saying, what about me? I just want to know, even before they understand anything about vowels, how do I even get them in the door?
Right.
How about that? Like, help me figure out what a developing program looks like so that I can potentially have a full-time teaching choir load. Maybe I'm not even there yet because there's something in the ways in which I'm not reaching everybody in my population at school. How can I help with that?
Yeah.
As opposed to only appealing to a very small group of people, which maybe is only collegiate folks, where we fail to meet the needs of the entirety of the membership. But
Yeah.
I hope to have, some sort of an impact on that. But honestly, Chris, I'm not sure exactly what within the, parameters of the organizational structure, what that will look like. And I'm looking forward to finding out. This is, of course, an 8-year commitment, which means along the way you're sort of figuring things out before then you take on the role of planning the conference, then being president
Right.
after that.
Right. Okay. All right. So I just had a brainstorm while you were talking about that related to the reading session. So maybe this could be maybe just this brainstorm will make magic later when you're president. Okay. So talking about developing choirs, I think one of the things that happens at conventions, ACDA in particular, because that's at least for me where most of the choral reading sessions that I've ever attended in my life have been. I've shown up occasionally at like a publisher's thing that they'll throw on locally or whatever, but for the most part at an ACDA convention. And I've always been kind of annoyed, but then as I got older, looking back, and I saw potential confusion in this, in how the reading sessions are labeled. In other words, it will be things like tried and true for the high school choir. Well,
Mm-hmm.
not every high school is the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? Tried and true for elementary school, middle school. And then I show up at like the collegiate one. Well, my kids can sight read really, really well, better than most adults. And so I go to the collegiate one to find what stuff for my high school choir, right? And but the reason I think now I look back on that is I also think I wonder how many teachers have gone into those thinking this is what my kids should be doing, regardless of what they are currently able to do. Here's what my kids should be doing. Well, this is in the ACDA high school packet.
Mm-hmm.
I should be giving my kids music that looks like this, and then they get to the classroom and they're not ready for music like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think about that also. Perfect transfer is the students that come out of college and go, I think I'll pull out this piece that I did with my college choir. They don't know yet that the
Uh-huh.
model for what a high school in a developmental level looks like and the repertoire, and let's face it, people just don't know enough repertoire, especially when they're just coming out of college. But I think that's a perfect transfer to that is now I'm seeing that this is supposed to be like my model to strive for, but I didn't actually know that that was the thing. And boy, I think I'm behind, which then exacerbates some of the issues of not feeling that you're measuring up or not feeling that you're where you need to be. Because gosh, if this is the high school rep that we're supposed to be doing, I haven't been doing my job. And
Yeah.
how does that help anybody?
Yeah. Yeah, and as I think about it, just like off the cuff here with you, I think about an alternative even, which is what if the reading sessions were labeled in a similar way. I'm a big sight reading factory nerd, as everybody knows, but like in a similar way to like leveled readers back when we were kids, and that this reading session is songs at level one and two, and we could even publish a definition like level one and two are diatonic for the most part. They're you're going to have leaps no bigger than a fifth, and you're going to have nothing no subdivisions beyond eighth notes or something. And then when you go into that session, you're looking for music that fits your kids' musical vocabulary, and
Yeah.
you're going to find that kind of stuff because I get requests all the time for, hey, do you talk about your kids reading, etc. How do I find stuff that's good for seventh graders? And I'm like, I don't know, I've never heard your seventh graders.
Mhm.
Like, what does that mean?
All seventh graders are, the same, and
Right.
depending on where you are. And I
Yeah.
also like the idea too of just like the tiered understanding. If you're in a middle school and maybe there's a reading session that's more middle school developmental, that's gonna speak to me in a different way than middle school, advanced or,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. But there's something that then kind of shares the the idea that not all middle school is the same. And there's
Hmm.
some middle school directors who are probably going to go to the high school one because that's more appropriate for where they are. But then there's some people who might be really just so happy that there's a middle school developmental something because that's where they're going to live and they need more repertoire ideas there.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. In fact, I had very recent guest, Cindy Ellis from Miami,
Mhm.
and
Love
she was
her.
telling me she has 90 minutes a day with her sixth graders.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting here listening to her talk about all the things her sixth graders can do. And I'm like, my ninth graders don't know those things.
Yeah.
Because, and
Yeah.
so it's not the same to just say, well, what's appropriate for sixth graders? Well, Cindy's sixth graders, that's a different
Mhm.
conversation than my sixth graders, and
Exactly right.
we don't have time. So yeah, that's an important distinction. And people also, actually, maybe this is a perfect segue to the other thing we were going to talk about, which is perfectionism. This
Mhm.
doesn't feed, this doesn't feed into people's, or can feed into people's need to be perfect as they perceive other people to be. And I talked about this with Cindy too, where like if I had 90 minutes a day with my kids, I don't know what we could achieve. We could achieve so many things. I see them for half that time.
Yeah.
And it's just an incredible thing. But so it would be not a good use of my energy to compare myself to Cindy because that's not fair. So when you talk about perfectionism, and I think maybe there's even some research you've done about this, why don't you tell us about your
Yeah.
perspective on this?
So one of the hats that I wear is researcher and also very central to my identity. And because I'm at UNT, that's an expectation that I'm publishing and that I'm doing the scholarly research, and it's a research one institution. Therefore, that's tied to its mission as well as a university. So one of the things that I became interested in recently is this construct of perfectionism. And the more I started to dig into the research literature, the more I realized, one of two things. Just there are people who pride themselves, think of that as like a badge of honor. I'm a perfectionist, and say that that's somehow a defining characteristic that makes them, good at their craft, for instance. And what we notice in the perfectionism literature is there are two different schools of thought. The first school of thought is there's no version of perfectionism that is functional or healthy in any way.
Mm,
Striving for something that is impossible is a problem. It's a dysfunction. You should not be striving for something that is impossible. Now, excellenceism is a different thing, and striving for excellence, that's a different thing. But then there are the other people on this camp that would say actually there's a functional side of, or a healthy side of perfectionism and a dysfunctional, unhealthy side of perfectionism. And the ways in which that is contrasted has to do with the intention behind it. So, as an example, the striving part of it, what we refer to as perfectionistic strivings, that's not problematic in that you're simply seeking to better yourself.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But this other side, which is perfectionistic concerns, that's tied in with all kinds of unhealthy behaviors, like I'm constantly doubting my actions. I'm constantly concerned about my mistakes, overly concerned to the point where maybe I'm ruminating, I'm perseverating, and I'm seeing those things, and that's the only reality in my brain. I teach at a place where there are a lot of perfectionists and there are a lot of people who are just very ambitious and come from very powerful high school programs that have ingrained in them this idea of, keep striving, which again, in and of itself is not the bad thing. But then where it starts to manifest into problems is where they come into UNT, where now they are a little bit more of a small fish in a larger pond, and they don't know how to assimilate is not really the right word, but they don't quite know how to fit into this space where other people are also excellent.
mm,
And then the first time they go to a performance or a departmental or a recital and they see, wow, that's a really fine singer. Instead of let's celebrate that, the first thought is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And that
mm-hmm,
message just continuing to be repeated is so damaging that we also then get to a place where people will perseverate over perceived mistakes and not A, be able to celebrate anybody else's successes, which is a problem, but B, they're also not able to think about how this is a journey and you don't have everything figured out and you're learning and you're growing and that that is a goal to
Yeah.
continue growing. And so when I see students, for instance, that are not open to feedback because they're so devastated about what that will mean about their identities, you told me that I wasn't perfect. This must really crush me because now I don't know what to do as I'm navigating myself in this pre-service music teacher space. I think that what if I'm not going to be successful at this field and I've invested so much of myself into this already? This is a problem because now I have to face this idea that somehow I wasn't good enough. That's the phrase that comes up over and over, as opposed to, oh, I don't have this figured out yet. What's the next thing I can figure out? Oh, okay, great. And students that will come to me after every field experience and say, I know that this thing right here was a struggle for me, and I could not get those singers to sing from do to la. What could I have done better? And I just celebrate that
Hmm.
because that is the growth mindset that we need. But also, that's the thing that doesn't get into the perseveration about what I didn't know and this mistake and that over and over narrative in your head. So the studies that I've conducted in this realm have to do with the levels of perfectionism and how they relate to imposter phenomenon. And no surprise to anyone, that is a relationship that is strong. And people who feel that they are perfectionistic, especially in the dysfunctional way, is very closely correlated with the feelings of imposter. And then the more recent one, two that I'm working on right now is how does perfectionism relate to burnout and does self-compassion function as a mediator of sorts? Does that help attenuate or lessen some of the feelings of burnout if you can be self-compassionate as opposed to giving yourselves the messages that somehow you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough. And then the other one that I'm working on has to do with social comparison and the ways in which perfectionism exacerbates, and there's that reciprocity between I see something online, for instance, and immediately I feel, but I didn't have that success. And therefore, maybe that means that I'm less than. That person got five students in the all state for Texas, but this one, and I only got one, or I didn't get any. And therefore, I'm measuring myself against that standard, which is hyper curated already because we know social media is just a highlight reel of all of the things that people are saying. Nobody's talking
Hmm.
about their bad days. And so that relationship between perfectionism and this social comparison also, so all of that has just been really fascinating for me, especially as it plays out with my own students and how we can help shift the narrative that it's okay. You're not fully formed as a teacher. You're still on a journey towards growing and you don't have it all figured out. And that's okay. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to have it all figured out. But what a damaging thing we do to students when we constantly think that it's okay to reinforce the perfection is the goal.
Yeah. Oh my
That's
goodness.
not
Yes.
helpful.
That is, yeah, that is just so important. And honestly, I think some of this comes with maturity too. We do get better at this in a lot of ways if someone's guiding us along the way as we get older. I know. Well, first I'll say, did you ever read Carol Dweck's mindset book?
Absolutely.
You did. Okay. So one of the things that I took away from that book, actually, I did take away some implications for my teaching, but my kids were young when I read that book, and I took away parenting implications too. Of just like when because she really convinced me of this idea that we don't want kids to identify with being seen by others as great.
Yes.
We want kids to be able to identify with being seen by others as someone who works hard to become great. And
Yes.
those are two very different things. Because of course,
Right.
if your self identity is to be seen as great, then as soon
Mhm.
as you fail, you're sunk.
And what a perfect transfer to the ways in which we do a disservice to people by saying you're talented.
Yep.
What does
Yep.
that do? How is that helpful? And yet we do that or we see that all the time. And then people don't know what to make of themselves when they do something and they didn't get into the top choir, or they didn't get into the fill in the blank because I don't understand how to wrestle with that in a way that still makes me feel okay about myself.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. We don't help. And I see people who like to do the, well, this is the premier ensemble, and therefore you need to, and using that a little bit weaponized. And I think about all of that as well in terms of the ways in which we build culture, which goes back again to developmental choirs and the role that that plays in your program. And I say to my students, if you only take pleasure in your fifth period, which might be your top choir in quotes, then what is it that you're doing in your second period? And do those students know that you still care about and are invested in them?
Hmm.
Or do they know that they're sort of the ugly stepsister, that you really love your fifth period?
Right.
And in the college, it's a little bit different because each of us has a different choir. But one of the things that's really important to me, I conduct an audition mixed choir that is technically, because in UNT it's very hierarchically structured, different conversation for another time. But the hierarchy is such that our choir is the third in the hierarchy. And it is incredibly important to me that those students know that the culture we build in there is so critically important because they are not seen in any way as less than by me. And that is the choir that is going to get all of me. And all of that investment is going to come to them, not as a less than anything else, but the narratives are so important in the ways in which we build culture and the ways in which we celebrate success and we define it in ways that are not I didn't get into that choir, and we might even start the very first day of classes, I will say. Some of you might have a little bit of hurt feeling about not being in the choir you would have liked to be in, but I'm still determined to make this an awesome experience for you, and we're going to have a great year together.
Yeah.
And that's a different message than sort of, either apologizing or not acknowledging that they're feeling some sort of way about that. And I think that also goes to the piece about the narrative of we are the premier choir, or if you didn't make it into this, somehow you're a less than musician. They're already feeling those things because they're perfectionists, they've only ever been in top choirs, et cetera, et cetera. So how we change that narrative really matters to me a
Yeah.
lot, profession.
Now I wonder, yeah, that is, I am so on that same page. And I wonder, I'm going to float a theory and I want to see what you think about it. And just because you see more kids from more different places and at the high school level than I do. I see mine and the ones around me. Um, and one of the things that we do in our program is we have a tiered program as well, but it's mostly by grade level and whether or not you've ever been in our class before.
Love
So
that.
so we don't have a like anybody can audition for the top choir kind of a thing, and the prettiest voices will get in. What we do instead is we have, oh, you're a beginner to our program here at Lee Summit High School. This is you're in the beginner class. And they're like,
Yes.
but I take piano lessons. Don't care. You've never sung with us before, so you're in a beginner class, and then they can go intermediate level and go up from there. Sometimes we call it like C team, JV, and varsity or whatever. And they can't audition even for the top choir unless they're an upperclassman.
Yeah.
And so they have to go through the process and they have to build skills, and we tell them that you need to be able to do this, and this to
Mhm.
be able to go to this next level. And so they are essentially being rewarded for skill building,
Yes.
rather than a talent scouting that occurred at
Uh-huh.
do you know what I mean? Just
Yes,
resident
it's a
resident.
criterion. It's a
Yeah. Hmm.
criterion referenced as opposed to selection. And I love this idea too that everybody sort of knows where that would be because I think that level of predictability and
Hmm.
clear guidelines as to this fits within this group, et cetera. I think labels matter a lot. And when I moved to Texas, I was a little bit uh, I was so puzzled by this very analogous to athletics, of course, but it was varsity and then it was non-varsity and then it was sub-non-varsity. And I wonder what it's like for a student who is in a sub-non-varsity class to feel empowered and that there is still, great value in that ensemble. Of course, I would argue it all has to do with the teacher and the culture that is
Sure.
established, but
Yep.
that's a different thing than you're in the seventh grade choir, you're in the eighth grade choir, you're in the beginner choir because you're new to us.
Yep.
And it sounds like you've established some parameters that make that really clear. And how empowering for a student to know if I'm working and getting better, then that means that this other thing is happening,
Yeah.
you know? But I think we become so sensitive to the cues of what it means to have arrived in a top choir as opposed to building a skill set. Some people started at nothing, and some people started at 12 years of piano lessons, but they're starting at their freshman year. And of course, there are going to be advantages and disadvantages that come from that. But I'm looking at your sign behind you, and thank you for your mistake, right? Like,
Yeah.
how often do you really celebrate that journey of growth as opposed to you made a mistake, that's it. Like your whole identity is wrapped up in the, but I'm not a person who makes mistakes and I don't know how to reconcile these feelings.
Right.
And then of course, the perfectionism mindset, which doesn't help.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually one of my most popular selling merch items. To people are putting that all
Love it.
over their classroom, and it actually was inspired by a student of mine
Mhm.
who came to us for the very first time. Her very first year of school period of any kind was 10th grade. No homeschool, no private school. This was a
Wow.
kid who just didn't attend school until 10th grade. And
Wow.
so she was just an autodidact, taught herself everything, and
Wow.
skated through somehow and got to high school. It was an incredible story, and she's currently a music education major, and
Nice.
the reason that she got me to start saying that to people is because I noticed that she had not been encultured into that attitude of singing something wrong and then, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
She would just cut loose and have it be wrong, and then when I tell her it was wrong, she would just mark it down with her pencil. There was no
Love it.
shame,
Mhm.
and it was and she got better super fast
Yeah.
because she was not holding back. She wasn't worried about the mistake. She wanted to know the mistake, but
Yes.
she didn't have that shame built in. And so of course I used her for years in our class as an example, like just sing like Holly. I don't know, she's an adult. I'll say her name, but and it's
What a great
that's
attitude.
yeah, uh-huh. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. And I wish I had that growing up, but I didn't.
Right. We don't have that message as it's acceptable. I have a little sticker outside my office door that says, keep the lesson, forget the mistake, with the idea that just like you can't perseverate and ruminate over and over and over on the thing. And of course, that's tied to all these other things we've been talking about. But what a cool kid to be able to say, I want to know what I can do better. And I
Hmm.
want to know without it being such a personal attack on who they are when you tell them that's not right.
Yeah,
And shouldn't we all embrace that sort of mindset where that's not yet where we need to be, but I'm looking to grow.
yeah.
Too often we have people who really want to grow, they just want to feel that they're still valid and or perfect, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Now, when you're with your, and we'll kind of wrap this up here, I think, because this has been really, really interesting, and I've loved it. When you're talking about this issue with music education majors that are under your care, so to speak, is this something that you address explicitly, or do you wait till it's a problem and pull the kid aside, I keep saying kid, young adult,
Mm.
aside and address that, or is this something you teach in class to head this off at the pass?
In the beginning, I wasn't so explicit about it. Now it is the thing we do on the first day of class all the time.
Mm,
But even further to that, I came into University of North Texas with this upfront already in place that I talked to you about, which is a peer lab choir. And I realized very quickly that that was going to be the place where I could build culture that sort
mm,
of sets them up. And I meet with them very intentionally before they receive their choir audition results. So right when they're starting college, right before they receive these results, before they ever start their first day of college, we have a conversation and I tell them our philosophy and upfront, cheesy saying, but super important is a rising tide lifts all boats. We celebrate everybody's successes here. And even if you're sitting there feeling like, wow, that person did really well, and I think that takes something away from me, your shift is going to happen in the, wow, that's so awesome. And what if all of us were awesome in our respective music classrooms? We would lose nothing and we would gain everything. So stop thinking about things in a zero sum way. When somebody does awesome, we celebrate everybody's successes. And I think that's a very different message right on the front end when they're starting college than somebody's doing something, you should be really nervous, and we're going to set up a real cutthroat. And if they did something, and then you should be rising up and you should be doing something better. And then I say to them, your choir placement does not define your identity. And when you get your choir results later tonight, I tell the TAs who are sending all of that, you send that at 9 p.m. after our meeting is over to make sure that they can do that in the privacy of their home and not in front of anybody else where their feelings are going to, have to be impacted with publicly. And I say, when you get your results, you are going to think, my identity is not tied to my choir placement. And that's a really big thing. And I think that intentionality of building the culture of celebrating other success first, because I just don't want people to be snotty to each other. I think it's also really important that they leave the program with that dismissing of the idea of choral elitism, which we just fight really hard on. And we have a whole day where we spend on growth mindset. We have a whole day that we spend on choral elitism and the ways in which we counteract those things. And I think just that constant building it in through the culture of we're celebrating other people's successes. Other people's successes do not diminish anything about what I'm doing. I think that's the little small way in which we can change the profession and the ways in which people are set up in it to still be successful. What if we're all successful? That's great.
Yeah.
As opposed to this zero-sum game.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That is so well said. Thank you so much. Jessica, this has been a blast. Thank you for spending an hour with me.
Thank you for chatting with me, and thanks for all that you do to advocate for our profession. It is noticed and valued.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choirlosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choirlosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there. And sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media, all of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.